So during the pandemic lockdowns, how did you readjust connecting to others using virtual tools like Zoom? How did that happen? And was that part of the program or responsibilities that come with being a laureate of a city?
When the pandemic happened, I, kind of put the typewriter in the case and wound up primarily teaching poetry and sitting with high school students and having them deal with it, and express their experiences. And that really felt like the most important work that I could be doing at that point. There's an amazing LA-based nonprofit called Get Lit, Words Ignite, um, that I still work with pretty frequently, and are just a powerhouse organization doing spoken word with youth in the city. But then, yeah, people started who I'd either written poems for or knew about my work. They'd be looking for entertainment for like company game night or like something at a conference to break up the parade of academics. And so I started doing these poetry keynotes where I would sit on the Zoom and I'd listen for an hour, and then I'd take notes. And at the end, I would write a poem that was sort of there's this idea of a found poem, which is like all of the words come from a newspaper or uh, there's a really great one. The former poet laureate of LA, Robin Cost Lewis, has a whole book that's found poems of her looking at representations of Black women in art through the centuries and looking specifically at what the museum descriptions of those paintings and drawings and statues say and making poems just from the museum descriptions. So it's like a little found poetry project, but with Zoom, with what people say at a conference or in a seminar or something like that.
Is there a term or something that you would define your poetry style as? You mentioned social justice or, environment or nature or whatever millions of topics or how would you define yourself as a poet?
Ooh, I try not to. I do my best to evade that question, I think. Um, I talk about what I do, and it's funny because we live in the age of hashtags, so you need to have a clear hashtag. And the one that I think has sort of cottoned on the most is the idea of typewriter poetry, um, which is funny because it doesn't quite say what it is. There's also the idea of like a poet for hire. Um, Rent poet works really well. Originally, when I took the name, it was because I was thinking about what I was doing as a month long experiment. I was going to try to pay my rent for 1 month using poetry. And then the irony is people heard it as rent a poet and they were like, "Oh, rent a poet. We know what that is." And I went, "Oh, this works. I'll just keep using that." And now it's been 7, 8 years of that. And it's led in a really interesting way to the laureate stuff. So this idea of what does it mean to be a poet that's not kind of locked away in a tower, but is in dialogue with the community. And I've been working. West Hollywood's an interesting city. It is one of the most progressive cities in the country, and it's also one of the like most LGBTQ plus cities. And so I have a group called Pride Poets that for Pride every year goes out and writes poems for people. And we've written over 1,000 poems for people at Pride parades, or then in the pandemic, we operated a poetry hotline so people could call in and have a poem written. And that's been the big brunt of my work with the city. But then, of course, April National Poetry Month is coming up. I've got a reading on April 6th called Trans Future Poetics, talking with trans poets specifically about envisioning the future and how language is a way of doing that. And it's been amazing to coming as sort of a scrappy kid who's writing poems for people in like the bus stop to then have this title and go, okay, who can I talk to? How can we take this seriously? And also, what are the voices that I want to amplify? Like someone's handed me a megaphone. Like, what do I do with this thing?
Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, you've taken your art to bridge communication with people and understanding and ask questions and then see that at the end of the day we're all human. So what an amazing accomplishments that you've done in your book, The Poetry of Strangers, What I Learned Traveling America. Oh, wait a minute.
Uh-oh.
I asked if maybe you could read a poem.
I totally can. Um, hmm.
Let's close with that.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. I like doing things. I'm a believer in doing things that scare me, so I'm gonna do this one. I just literally finished writing it right before we got on the call. Um, my dad passed away unexpectedly almost a year ago, and we have his 1 year memorial coming up. Um, and they need a program or a poem for the program for the memorial by the end of today. So this is what I've been working on. It is fresh, and yeah, he worked during his life as a professor at UCLA in public health. And so the title of this poem is An Education. We get up at dawn to watch the sunrise over Joshua Tree, and I pack breakfast for all of us. You'd be a good dad, my friend says. The day before I made pancakes. They remind me of him. He was always in charge of breakfast. Sometimes baked goods are the best way to say I love you. He'd make waffles and able skewers, and those German pancakes with raised edges and powdered sugar crusts. That's what he did with his PhD, when no one was watching. Fridays were my treat, his morning off. We'd go get donuts or pan dulce. He found the pan dulce store owner's daughter a job on campus. That store is closed now. He's dead. I make my friends pancakes in the desert. Remember countless camping trips with my parents, the way the whole sky fills with stars at night. How much patience it takes to start a fire. Who in this short life will you choose to shelter? What will you feed? You'd be a good dad, my friend says. I think I learned from the best.
Thank you, Brian. And I'm so sorry for your loss, but your dad would be so proud to know that he had that impact on your life and that he was there for you and you were there for each other. Thank you.
Thanks for making the space to share that and for giving me a deadline to finish it. I was like, before I come on here, I have to finish this. And now I have some edits based on reading it.
I loved it.
Thanks so much, Laura. I appreciate it. Take care.